I'm Haleh Esfandiari, the director of the Middle East program at the Wilson Center. We are delighted to have with us today His Excellency Imad Mustafa, the ambassador of the Syrian Arab Republic to the United States. The ambassador was appointed as the Syrian ambassador to the United States in March 2004. Prior to this, he served as the dean of the Faculty of Information Technology at the University of Damascus and was Secretary General of the Arab School on Science and Technology. Mr. Mustafa is co-founder of the Network of Syrian Scientists, Technologists, and Innovators Abroad, and he was an active consultant to several international and regional organizations on science and technology policies in the Middle East. He was also a member of the Syrian team responsible for drafting reform strategies for the Ministry of Culture, Education, and Higher Education. He has also written more than 200 articles and several books in English and Arabic, including The Echoes of Orpheus, Creativity Out from the Windows of Hell, and Concurrent Engineering. They don't match at all.
They don't know.
No. And of course, he's also a co-author of the UN-sponsored Human Development Report in the Arab World. It was published in 2003. Today, he's going to speak on US, Syria, and the old new Middle East, confrontation or cooperation. The ambassador will speak for maybe 25 to 30 minutes, and then we'll open the floor to questions. I would urge the audience not to make any statement and just use the opportunity to ask questions. And could I also ask you to close your cell phones, please? Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Of course, discussing Syrian-U.S. relationship is not an easy issue, taking into account the difficulties those relations have faced in the past 4 years. I always like to remind my audience whenever I start a talk about the fact that relations between Syria and the United States were not confrontational in the past. Yes, we have always had issues with the United States, and the United States had always issues with us, mainly because of the ongoing Arab-Israeli conflict and the core issue of that conflict, the Palestinian issue. Just a reminder, despite past difficulties between Syria and the United States, two major landmarks of cooperation should be mentioned. As an example, one of them has to do with the Second Gulf War, when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. Our troops were next to your troops in the fight for the liberation of Kuwait. So Syrian troops were actually allies to U.S. troops. Sometimes this surprises people when I tell them this story, because Syria is supposed to be an enemy to the United States. We are supposed to be a quote-unquote rogue state, not a state that will be in alliance with the United States in one major conflict. Another important landmark that I always try to remind my audience of when I discuss U.S.-Syrian relations has to do with the tragic events of September 11 and the fact that Syria provided a wealth of information and intelligence to the United States about Al-Qaeda, and there is a famous letter addressed by Secretary Powell to the United States Congress in which he, quote-unquote, thanks Syria for helping save American lives. This sort of cooperation was deemed important and vital for the Syrian national interest for one very important reason from our perspective is that we understand that without the United States of America's involvement in the Middle East peace process, there can be no Middle East peace. The United States happens to be the only country in the whole world that has any sort of leverage on Israel because of the tremendous military, financial, political, and diplomatic assistance and aid support that the United States gives to Israel. We, in our part of the world, we consider this support as being blind, flagrant, and totally biased. And sometimes we even consider it to be contradictory to the national interests of the United States and even to Israel itself, taking into account that the Israeli society is divided into what we would call the peaceniks and the likodniks, or the war camp and the peace camp, or those who believe in a Zionist ideology about the divine right given to Israel to expand, to grab more and more land, to build more and more settlements, as opposed to the other camp in Israel, a constituency for peace, in which many Israelis believe that in order for Israel to be accepted by its neighbors, and in order for the grandchildren of the Israelis to live in peace with our grandchildren, they need to understand that they cannot continue their policies of occupation, of oppression, and of humiliation to the occupied people under their reign. So because we in Syria, we understood that it is of paramount importance to have good relationship with the United States, because, as you all remember, Syria also, as a part of its territories, occupied the Golan, and Syria has embraced the Pan-Arab Peace Initiative based on the fair principle of land for peace. We realized in Syria that maintaining a solid practical working relationship with the United States will help serve our national interests, but also, being realistic, we understand that this should also reflect on the national interests of both the United States and its allies. Of course, needless to remind everybody that the war on Iraq, the invasion and occupation of Iraq, was the tipping point after which bilateral relations between Syria and the United States dramatically deteriorated. It is known to everybody that Syria has opposed this war on Iraq, understanding that it will create many more problems than it will resolve. It will fuel extremism, fundamentalism across our region, and most importantly, it will further destabilize our region and probably have terrible repercussions on all neighboring countries, not only on Iraq. The issue of the Iraqi refugees in Syria, in Jordan, and elsewhere in the Middle East is just one small reminder of the so-called collateral damage that has befallen other neighboring countries of Iraq. But there are other many issues that the war on Iraq, the occupation of Iraq, has created. Back to the Syrian-U.S. relations, as I have said, once the war on Iraq started, relations between Syria and the United States deteriorated dramatically, and the current administration started using terms to describe Syria that it has never used before, such as Syria being a quote-unquote rogue state, or Syria becoming the most eligible candidate to join the official list of the axis of evil. We have not joined it yet, but we are always reminded of it. Having said this, and despite the difficulties, we in Syria, we realized that the U.S. presence in Iraq has become a reality. Whether we like it or not, today the United States is the occupying authority in Iraq, and it has the upper hand on whatever goes on in Iraq. And because it is of our own national interest to find a solution to the ongoing conflict in Iraq and to help stabilize the situation in Iraq, we started offering cooperation with the United States on Iraq as early as 2004. Of course, at that point, the U.S. administration would flatly reject any attempts by the Syrians to help stabilize the situation in Iraq. And whenever they would raise an issue with us, like allegations concerning the infiltration of insurgents from Syria into Iraq, our response would not only be to refute these accusations or deny them, but to tell the United States, look, if you think there is a problem there, let us work together on this problem. I remember that as back as April 2004, I was instructed by my government to meet with top officials from the Pentagon and tell them that while you continue saying, repeating those allegations about Syria allowing insurgents to infiltrate those borders, and while we are telling you this is untrue, we don't want to waste time and energy on this. I am here to officially offer the U.S. administration actual cooperation, actual engagement on securing the Syrian-Iraqi borders. And I remember well that I started by offering the officials from the Pentagon to Assistant Secretaries of Defense at the time as a starter joint trilateral patrols, exchanging information, sharing intelligence, field meetings between officers on both sides of the border, but of course all our attempts were rejected. By August 2004, a large U.S. official delegation visited Damascus and started and discussed with us the possibility of restarting engagement on Iraq. And because, as I have said, it is in our own national interest to help stabilize the situation in Iraq, we thought that this offers a common ground. At least, apparently, the United States claims to want to stabilize the situation in Iraq. So why not? Why not help the Iraqis? We were not offering actually help to the United States, but help to the Iraqis, because we in Syria believe that as long as violence continues in Iraq, as long as bloodshed and sectarian strife continues in Iraq, the U.S. administration will have a pretext to remain in Iraq. And let me be honest and candid with you, it's of a paramount national interest for Syria, one, to preserve the territorial integrity of Iraq, two, to see all foreign armies withdraw from Iraq. Because of our understanding of this situation, we thought that if we can actually help stabilize the situation in Iraq and put an end to the ongoing situation of bloodshed and violence, on one hand we will be doing a great service to our Iraqi sisters and brothers, but on the other hand, we will not give the U.S. administration or any other power a pretext to continue its military presence in Iraq. So, as of August 2004, we agreed to resume cooperation with the United States on Iraq. This cooperation lasted for a very short period of time, till January 2005, when Undersecretary of State Richard Armitage visited Damascus and came to us with a list of requests concerning Iraq. And to prove our goodwill, we fulfilled everything that we have promised Richard Armitage at the time. And I think you can always verify our side of the story, because Richard Armitage is still around. And we thought that would be a restarting point in which the United States and Syria can re-engage diplomatically. However, this did not happen. As you all know, that the whole team changed at the State Department in January 2005, and a new team came, and for reasons that are not clear to us today, any attempts to engage diplomatically and politically between the United States and Syria stalled completely. And this continued to be the case till 7 months ago, when an unprecedented meeting between Secretary Rice and our foreign minister took place in Sharm el-Sheikh. In that meeting, Secretary Rice asked our foreign minister to resume the past cooperation Syria used to have with the United States on intelligence, military, and security issues. We told the United States at that meeting that it is impossible for us in Syria to re-engage on those issues with the United States while the United States continues to refuse to talk to us, to engage with us diplomatically and politically. We do not believe that Syria is a charity in which we would give and take nothing back in return. That meeting in Sharm el-Sheikh ended with our understanding that the ball is in the American court. If they want us to cooperate with them on the security, military, and intelligence level, they also have to engage with us diplomatically and politically. We're not going to do this while the top U.S. leaders and officials continue to bash and to lambast Syria in every available occasion. So nothing happened after Sharm el-Sheikh till a couple of months ago. Another meeting took place in Istanbul, also between Secretary Rice and our Foreign Minister Walid al-Muallim. This time, Secretary Rice asked Syria to be present to attend the Annapolis conference. And we told the United States at the meeting in Istanbul that it will be practically impossible for us to attend Annapolis if we will not be allowed to discuss our occupied Golan. It's preposterous that Syria would go and attend a peace conference, and Syria has a part of its territories occupied by Israel, and sit there, listen to the speeches, applaud the speakers, and not even be allowed to discuss its occupied territories. It doesn't work this way. Secretary Rice said to her Syrian counterpart that it would be impossible for the United States to include the Golan because the agenda was already set. And we told her, well, if the Golan will not be included, then Syria will not be able of attending. To make a long story short, lots of discussions and intermediation took place, and 3 days prior to Annapolis, the United States informed Syria that it is pleased to tell us that a special session on the Israeli-Syrian track would be included. Of course, a session on the Lebanese-Israeli track also will be included, and thus a comprehensive peace in the Middle East will be discussed during Annapolis. So we decided to join. And in a way or another, we believe that was a minor but a positive improvement in U.S.-Syrian relations. And we hope that this will lead to more and more diplomatic and political discussions and engagement that might lead to the resumption of fully fledged sort of cooperation we used to have with the United States on all levels and in all fronts. Of course, there are many skeptics about Annapolis, and also there are many people who believe that Annapolis was something great that has happened. The skeptics look at the lack of any preparations prior to Annapolis and consider it as just a forum in which foreign ministers and leaders of states gave public speeches, and they consider the whole exercise in Annapolis as a grand photo opportunity. Those who are more on the optimistic side think that regardless of everything else, Annapolis did create momentum for the peace talks between the Israelis and the Palestinians that desperately need some sort of new blood or a push here or a push there, and it did create a paradigm in which all parties, everybody involved, agreed that there is a need for a comprehensive approach to the Arab-Israeli conflict and to help bring peace to the Middle East. As far as we are concerned, the Syrians, I would say here was this international forum, and there was for us an opportunity to come, to participate, and to remind the whole world that a part of Syria is occupied, also a part of Lebanon is occupied, and there is a need to address all issues, not only the Israeli-Palestinian issue, taking into account, of course, that the Palestinian issue is the core issue of the Arab-Israeli conflict. We are not belittling the Palestinian issue. We still in Syria believe that it has precedence on everything else. But having said this, we also need to remind the world that peace cannot be universal, comprehensive, and cannot prevail in the Middle East as long as the Israeli occupation of the Syrian territories and the Lebanese territories continues. And of course, as long as there is no independent, sovereign, viable Palestinian state, then our region will really not enjoy the benefits and fruits of the peace that all parties dream of. I would say that reading the situation on the ground after Annapolis is not very encouraging. Israel has resumed its plans to expand its illegal settlements in Har Homa and elsewhere, and the Israeli government is now thinking of changing the status of the so-called illegal posts in the occupied Palestinian territories into what they would consider legal settlements. And they consider them legal from their viewpoint, regardless of the fact that all Israeli settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories are illegal according to international law and to what is accepted as legitimate behavior and accepted norms of political behavior by any occupying party in the world. Also, the so-called targeted assassination policy continues in Gaza and elsewhere in Palestine, occupied territories. Only yesterday did the Israeli forces capture and imprison about 32 Palestinians from the West Bank, not from Gaza itself. So the prospects are not that encouraging, that positive, reading the situation as it is on the ground. However, on the other hand, just to be realistic, we happen to know that meetings are taking place in Paris, and Palestinian and Israeli officials are discussing all issues. Now, if we come back to the Syrian U.S. track, or let me say the following to you. Today in Syria, we believe that the Syrian-Israeli peace track will not be relaunched as long as there is no U.S. administration that fully and enthusiastically supports peace talks between the Syrians and the Israelis. Now, in the past, let me remind you that it was President Bush Sr. who convened the Madrid Bush conference and who actually played an important role in brokering Syrian-Israeli peace talks. And then it was President Clinton during his 8 years of term that worked so hard with his team trying to bring the Arabs and the Israelis to a peace agreement, but also, as far as we are concerned, who worked also very hard on the Syrian-Israeli peace track. Now, the situation with the present administration has changed from its nonchalance in the beginning, saying that they don't want to spend any energy, time, or effort on trying to negotiate peace between the Arabs and the Israelis, or to play the role of the broker of peace. But then they evolved into a position in which the U.S. administration has become ferociously opposed to any peace talks between, at least, let I say this, the Syrians and the Israelis. In many occasions, the United States, whenever it would discuss the possibility of reviving peace talks between Syria and Israel, the U.S. administration will always be adamant about opposing such peace talks. Now, what we are told is that the U.S. administration has gone back to a situation in which, on one hand, they do not actively support peace talks between the Syrians and the Israelis, but on the other hand, they are not interested in playing any role in trying to bring the Syrians and the Israelis together to the negotiation table. At least this role is, as we are being told by our Russian friends, this role will be attempted by the Russians very soon in the Moscow Peace Conference they are planning to convene as a follow-up to the Annapolis Peace Conference. we look at the situation today between Syria and the United States, and we still believe that it is vital for us to re-engage politically and diplomatically with the United States. The difficulties are there. We cannot deny them. But what we believe is when two countries have difficulties between each other, then they need, more than any other two countries, to sit together and to address all the issues, put all the issues on the table and address all the issues. We still have a common ground upon which we can build and move forward. Is there a possibility to improve relations with Syria and the present administration in its last year and its lame duck year? Yes, there is, both theoretically speaking and potentially such a possibility. We do not believe that dramatic improvements will take place, but it has already considerably improved in the past 6 months, relatively speaking, of course. We don't hear the sort of accusations about Syria we used to hear in the past 4 years from the Bush administration. However, we are still regarded as a negative player in the Middle East. And despite that, the Europeans and most of the world consider Syria to be a part of the solution, not a part of the problem, the US is still hesitant, reluctant, and probably divided within the administration itself about the role it should play towards Syria and whether they should engage or otherwise with Syria. Only yesterday I heard an astounding statement by President Bush, in which when he was meeting with some Jewish leaders because of the Hanukkah, and he told them that the Jews have fled Syria because of oppression. This surprised me and astounded me a lot, and in a way it is educational, the level of misunderstanding and lack of knowledge they have about Syria. There is a prosperous, thriving Jewish Syrian community that lives in Brooklyn, that enjoys the best possible relations with their motherland, with Syria. They visit there regularly. I attend all their occasions. I am always the guest of honor at every wedding, every bar mitzvah they have, and they have maintained the best possible, warmest relations with Syria. And they didn't know till yesterday when President Bush told them that they were oppressed when they used to live in Syria. So in a way, this little story reflects a lot about the misunderstanding and the totally wrong perceptions the Bush administration has got about my country. I'll stop here. Thank you very much, and I hope we can move to the Q&A session.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. We are going to open the floor now to questions and comments. Let me ask you the first question myself. You talked about U.S.-Syrian relations, but you didn't mention at all Iran, which I think Iran's relation to Syria have been probably discussed a number of times between the U.S. and Syria. Do you care elaborating a little bit on this issue?
Yes, thank you very much. The relations between Syria and Iran are good, excellent relations, the sort of relations we would like to have with every other country in our region. Please do remember that the U.S. administration likes to demonize Iran and likes to present Iran in an extremely negative way. Well, this is the privilege of the U.S. administration. Iran has not done anything bad to us. As far as we are concerned, for the past 2,000 years, or let me say 1,400 years, Iran did not invade any Arab country. Iran does not occupy today the Palestinian territories. Iran did not bombard Lebanon June 2006 and destroy 2/3 of the Lebanese infrastructure. And Iran is not occupying Iraq and doing what is happening today in Iraq. So as far as we are concerned, from our Syrian perspective, Iran is a regional neighbor. We don't even have common borders with Iran, and we don't mind having good relations with Iran. Actually, we recommend that the United States start talking to Iran and engage with Iran. It's always useful to engage and to talk to a country that you have issues with than not to do this. Let me give you an example from our own history, our relations with Turkey. We used to have very difficult, problematic relations with Turkey. Today, Turkey is our #1 trade partner in the whole world, and our leadership enjoys the warmest possible relationship, politically and even personally, with the Turkish leadership. And this was a great lesson for both of Syria and Turkey. Once you start engaging, once you address the issues, suddenly all the past difficulties that we used to think as insurmountable either vanish into thin air or are put in perspective, in its right perspective, and become addressable issues. So yes, Syria does have good relations with Iran, but it does not mean that because the United States has a problem with Iran, we also should engage in an exercise in which we demonize Iran.
Thank you. Rafi, please. Could I ask you to wait for the mic and here, Lori, and identify yourself. Thank you.
My name is Rafael Cohen Almagor. I'm at the Woodrow Wilson Center. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, for these words. I've been listening to you very carefully. There are 3 stumbling blocks between the United States and Syria that might interfere in the relationship, in the creation of the good, solid relations that you would like to envisage. One is the issue of the connections between Syria and North Korea. If you can elaborate on this for a while. The second issue is your relationship between Syria and terrorist organizations. You are hosting the notorious Khalid Mash'al for some time now. If you can elaborate on this issue. And then the third stumbling block is really your relationship with Lebanon. How you foresee the future between Syria and Lebanon? What kind of relationship you like to see between the two countries? And another issue between Israel and...
Very long question. This will take half an hour to address all 3 issues, okay? Okay?
I ask you to
half an hour.
Short questions, please.
First, we were never ever told, this is a big surprise to me, and it's a good educational experience for me. We were never told that relations between Syria and North Korea are an issue between Syria and the United States. Actually, the United States is diplomatically engaging with North Korea, and I think this is very good. This is the sort of advice I would like to give any country in the world. You have a problem with a country, engage with this country, and in a way, I think the relations between the United States and North Korea are maturing up to a certain practical degree. I hope all the best for both countries, and I hope they will have good relations with each other. Nobody has ever discussed with us relations between Syria and North Korea, that are normal relations. Now, if you are referring to the hype in the U.S. media, not by even the Israeli government or the American government, about the alleged Syrian-Korean nuclear link or cooperation or program, well, I think nobody is discussing this anymore. I would tell you the following. I can't disclose a lot publicly, but even here in the United States, at a highly classified hearing that was presented in the U.S. Congress a couple of weeks ago, very key officials from the U.S. administration had to say behind closed doors that there are no Syrian nuclear projects, no Syrian-Korean nuclear cooperation. So this is, the sort of silly, absurd, ridiculous hype that used to remind us of the sort of stories we used to read when the Iraqi WMDs were discussed prior to the war on Iraq, or the even more absurd stories about the links between Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda. It's so easy to fabricate stories if you are ideologically motivated, and if you have a gullible audience that does not critically read and analyze the sort of information they are being fed or told. Now, as far as Khalid Mash'al is living in Syria, let me remind you that Khalid Mash'al is a Palestinian who used to live in his own homeland, Palestine. And then the Israelis kicked him out to Jordan. And then the Jordanians made a deal with the Israelis I'm not going to deal with, and today he lives in Syria. He's a human being, he's a Palestinian person. Not only him, 500,000 Palestinians living today in Syria. We did not invite them to come to Syria. They were expelled, they were kicked out from their homeland. If Israel would allow the 500,000 Palestinians from Syria, 500,000 Palestinians from Lebanon, I don't know how many other millions of Palestinians to go back to their occupied territory, we have no problem. But the other alternative is to throw with due respect, Khalid Mash'al in the sea? What is this? And people sit here and say, why do you host Khalid Mash'al in Syria? We did not invite him to come to Syria. When the Israelis will realize that they cannot continue to occupy the Palestinian territories and to humiliate them and to push the Palestinians into conditions of despair and suffering, then I don't think that the Palestinians will remain in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and elsewhere. They will go back to their territories. And when the Israeli state will realize that the Palestinians are also human beings equal to the Jews of the world and they have a right to return to their homes and villages, then the whole issue will be resolved. And nobody will be discussing Khalid Mash'al with Syria anymore. However, if you know of a better solution to allow Khalid Mash'al and the 500,000 Palestinians, refugees who live today in Syria, to go back to their occupied territories, then we will be very glad to address this issue. Moving to Lebanon, Syria recognizes Lebanon as a sovereign independent state. When we entered Lebanon to end the civil war there, invited by the Lebanese government, endorsed, our military presence was endorsed by the Arab League, by the European Union, by the former Soviet Union, and most importantly by the government of the United States of America, that never ever described our presence in Lebanon as an occupation till after the fallout between Syria and the United States because of Iraq. Suddenly, within a very short period of time, the US officials started to describe our so-called presence in Lebanon as an evil occupation of Lebanon. Very good. The United Nations Security Council passed a resolution demanding that Syria, all foreign troops withdraw from Lebanon. We withdrew from Lebanon. I hope that this will give the good example to the other people who occupy other territories. Like, can you imagine the Palestinians demonstrating in the streets of Jerusalem, demanding that the Israelis withdraw, and within a couple of months the Israeli troops say, okay, our presence has become controversial in the Palestinian territories, let us withdraw? The fact that anyone can compare our presence in Lebanon to the U.S. occupation of Iraq or Israeli occupation of the Arab territories is not even being realistic. We were in Lebanon. Our presence was endorsed, as I have said, by world powers, by the official government of Lebanon, and a United Nations resolution passed demanding that we withdraw from Lebanon. We withdrew from Lebanon. End of the story. If you are asking about the terrible, horrible crime, the assassination of Rafiq al-Hariri, fair enough. There is an ongoing investigation about this assassination of Rafiq al-Hariri. The United Nations is investigating this assassination. It is considered to be the largest investigation team in the history of mankind. Forensic scientists, criminal investigators, policemen, Interpol experts, you name them, they are there, working hard to reveal the truth about this terrible crime. As far as we are concerned, Serge Ramirez, the lead investigator from the United Nations, has submitted at least 4 reports to the United Nations Security Council. Those reports are available online. Please go and Google them. In each report, he praises the Syrian cooperation with his investigation. From our viewpoint, we are committed to help reveal the truth about this crime, and it helps the Syrian national interest to actually reveal the truth about this terrible crime, so that nobody will point fingers in a baseless way and accuse this party or that party for politically motivated reasons.
Al Milliken, Washington Independent Writers. How do most Syrians see the Golan Heights historically, and how have Syria's borders changed through not only recent but more ancient history as well?
Well, this is a very difficult question that will take hours to discuss. As you know, Syria is a very old country. Damascus, the capital city of Syria, happens to be the oldest continuously inhabited city in the whole world. When we compare Damascus to other capitals like Cairo or Baghdad, we consider them baby cities. Cairo is only 1,040 years old. Baghdad is only 1,200 years old. Damascus is at least 4,000 years old. So, but let's come back to the Golan. regardless of history and everything, the modern Syrian Arab Republic became a member of the United Nations in 1945 with its internationally recognized borders. Okay? Now, according to international law, any military occupation and annexation of occupied territory is illegal and it's banned according to international law. How do we regard the Golan? We regard the Golan a part of Syria. Today we have also 500,000 Syrians, refugees in Syria from the Golan, dreaming of going back to their houses, their villages, their farms that they were evicted from after the Israeli invasion in 1967. So we regard the Golan as part and parcel of the Syrian national territory, and it is well understood by all parties in the world, even by the Israeli leaders who have expressed this in the past. Check the Rabin famous document, so-called the Rabin deposit, in which he accepts the fact that Israel is willing to go back to the line of June 4, 1967 in return for comprehensive peace with Syria. So the Golan is Syrian territory. It is recognized by the whole world as Syrian territory. Even the Israelis understand that this is Syrian territory. Now, the fact that they are bringing tens of thousands of Russian immigrants to live in the Golan does not change the fact that those are illegal settlers in the Golan. Many of them, by the way, are not Jewish. They are Orthodox, Russian Orthodox Christians.
Yes, please.
Ambassador, on the negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians, suppose they were to reach an agreement resulting in an independent Palestinian state, but this agreement would allow only a fraction of the refugees to return. Would any agreement reached between the Israelis and the Palestinians be acceptable, or does Syria have some strong wishes that must be incorporated in any such agreement?
Syria has time and again said that we fully support the Palestinian cause, and whatever the Palestinians will agree upon, we will fully support. Taking into account that the Palestinians have suffered a lot. All of us have suffered, of course, but it's mainly the Palestinians that have suffered more than anybody else. Whatever they deem fit for their national interest, we will fully support. So if this is the question, the answer is yes. We will support whatever the Palestinian will choose to do. We do understand that there is a basic fundamental human right, the right for every refugee to go back to his or her town, city, or house. But we're not going to interfere in this. Let the Palestinians as a nation agree with each other, among each other, and then negotiate this with the Israelis, and whatever they will support, we will support.
In the back, yes, please. Identify yourself.
My name is Jeff Morency. I'm a graduate student at Georgetown. Mr. Ambassador, I wonder if you've had a chance to meet with any of the U.S. presidential candidates, if any have refused perhaps your invitations to meet, and if you're optimistic that with the change of administration we can see a change in U.S. engagement of Syria, potentially resulting in not only kind of declining rhetoric, but potentially the removal of Syria from the list of terrorist states.
Embarrassing question. Let me divide them into three categories. The first category, I would not even consider requesting a meeting with. The second category, I thought that I don't need to meet with them, but I can establish a sort of dialogue between me and some of their close advisors, which is fair. I think this is very useful and constructive. And the third, without naming names, yes, I have met with at least 3 or 4 times, and we have actually discussed how it will serve the United States national interests and the Syrian national interest to engage in the future.
Yes, please. And then, yeah. It works.
I'm Harry Wedower. I'm an international lawyer. Thank you for coming, Mr. Ambassador. My question is, does President Assad believe that the framework for an accommodation between the U.S. and Syria exists regarding your country's support for groups such as Hamas and the like, and what my country refers to as the war on terror?
Yes, actually, I believe that that my government, my leadership, the president of Syria, we all understand that the only way forward is to sit all of us with each other, to engage with each other, and to find a comprehensive solution. What you have described as the terrorist movement of Hamas is the democratically elected government of the Palestinian people. Please do remember the Bush doctrine and the need for the Arab nations to democratically elect their leaders, and you will understand what I am referring to. But let's not go into these details. You only have two alternative courses. Either you engage in this ongoing war forever, in which people will be killed on both sides, or you will understand that there are some basic fundamental human rights that the United States should be very proud of promoting, like allowing the Palestinians to have their independent, free, sovereign state, and ending occupation, and also let everybody recognize everybody and let us all live in peace. All Arab states, without a single exception, including my country, have embraced the so-called Pan-Arab Peace Initiative that was adopted in a Pan-Arab summit meeting in Beirut 2002 and then repeated time and again based on the following: if the Israelis will end the occupation of the Arab territories, the Palestinian West Bank and Gaza, the Syrian Golan, the Lebanese Shebaa Farms, Ghajar village, and I forgot what's the name of the third piece of land occupied by the Israelis. Then all Arab countries, without a single exception, are willing to offer Israel comprehensive peace, normalized relations, recognition. Normalized relations will be the term to summarize everything that comes after. And we believe that this is a very fair exchange. Now, once this peace agreement is reached on the fair principle of land for peace, I think negative terms like Hamas is a terrorist organization, or Israel has terrorist practices practiced against us on a daily basis. This is what we say in our region. When we see the Israeli troops killing our people on semi-daily basis, we consider Israel as a terrorist state. You consider Hamas a terrorist state. Okay. You can always use negative terms and demonize your enemy. But at least we have a vision for the future in which all Arab countries, without a single exception, have agreed on land for peace, an honorable peace, to end all occupations, to end suffering, and on the other hand, live in security, in peace, and in acceptance of each other. This is what Israel claims that it wants. It claims that it wants acceptance, recognition, and security. And we are telling them, you can get all of this, but you can't get this while you continue to occupy our territories and inflict pain, suffering, and humiliation on our peoples. And I think as an American, you shouldn't find a problem in such an exchange.
Yes, please. And then, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. The peace talks with the Israelis has proven in the past to be exercised in futile, or exercised in futility. The peace talks with the Israelis have ended with the Israelis finding a way out of its commitment, of any commitment toward the peace. And the Israeli governments have failed also. Now, the Israelis have objected to the American attempt in the Security Council to present a... So my question is, why do the Syrian people have to believe now that the Israelis are more leaning toward peace, and why should Syria be more encouraged to hold peace talks with them, even though the Israeli government has proven now that it has taken steps that does not really prove good intentions toward peace?
Thank you.
Why? For a simple reason. Syria has adopted what we call in Syria, at least 15 years ago, our strategic option for peace. We want to regain back our occupied territories, but we want to do this through a peaceful resolution of the Arab-Israeli conflict. Now, is Israel willing and ready for peace or not? This varies. Israel is oscillating. Sometimes with some Israeli leaders, Israel became forthcoming and really wanted to engage in peace talks. Then other Israeli leaders shifted Israel back to a more right-wing hardliner position, our understanding is the following. At one point, peace is inevitable. At one point, Israel will realize that it cannot continue to depend forever on sheer military superiority to sustain its occupation of our territories and its subjugation of our peoples under the occupation. So, in a way, this is not philosophical, it's actually realistic, but also it reflects what we believe in deeply. Israel at one point will realize that this cannot continue forever. And in a way or another, if not today, next year, if not next year, 10 years from now, they will suddenly realize that they need to become serious and to negotiate a peaceful resolution to this ongoing conflict. In June 2006, despite the enormous military superiority that Israel enjoys, and despite everything they have done to Lebanon, they were not capable of securing their kibbutz, their villages, and their towns in northern Israel. One day, Israel will realize that, yes, we enjoy this incredible support, military support of the United States of America, and all this generous financial, military, diplomatic, political, but where is this leading us to? The conflict goes on and on and on. The only solution would be for the Israelis to realize that since this is inevitable, then the sooner the better. Let us do it today instead of doing it 10 years from now. Because 10 years from now means more and more suffering for people on all sides, human suffering regardless. Even you are suffering because of the ongoing Israeli conflict. I'm not talking about dramatic, terrible things like the horrible crime of September 11. Why should you pay all this amount of taxpayer money supporting the huge Israeli armada and military arsenal and generously subsidizing the Israeli economy when Israel is really not a developing country? It enjoys one of the highest levels of income in the world. Probably Israel is unique in the whole world of being a receptor of financial aid when its economy is a prosperous economy. This is unique. You don't have another country that receives foreign aid on one hand while it is enjoying prosperity and a high standard of living on the other hand.
Yes, please.
Michelle Steinberg from Executive Intelligence Review. Mr. Ambassador, I read as part of my job almost every day all of the English language Israeli press, and there is often quotes, including from the president, Shimon Peres, saying we must make peace with Syria at some point. I'd like to ask you to elaborate, if you can, how that is reflected in back channels, direct, and elaborate what you said about Russia playing a role in pursuing the Israel-Syria track.
Thank you for reminding me and the audience that actually the Israeli leaders themselves say what I have just been saying. It is inevitable. At one point we will make peace with Syria. At one point we will allow the Palestinians to have their independent state. When this will evolve and when it will happen, I'm afraid to tell you this has become a hostage of purely internal domestic Israeli policies. It's the inside political fights and bickering inside Israel itself that is taking the more important issue of peace between Israel and the Arabs as a hostage. Now, about back channels, there are no very important back channels. They are just countries and individuals who discuss the possibilities of restarting peace talks between Syria and Israel. They discuss this with us. They discuss this with the Israelis. They try to come to understanding. They are hopeful. As far as we are concerned, we in Syria, we oppose secret talks between Syria and Israel. What we want is to talk under the sun. We have a very clear position in Syria. The moment Israel is willing to start peace talks with Syria, we are willing to start peace talks with Israel, but not in a secretive way. We think that there is nothing secretive about peace talks between Syria and Israel. The Syrian position is a very clear one. So why should we go into secret channels to discuss peace between us and the Israelis? Of course, I'm not telling you that we should negotiate in front of the TV cameras. I'm telling you that the event itself, the peace process itself, should be a public event, but negotiations should take place behind closed doors, naturally. I'm not implying otherwise. So many back channels come to us and explore with us the possibility of conducting some sort of track 2 diplomacy or secret peace talks between Syria and Israel. We always tell them we don't believe in track 2 diplomacy. We believe in track 1 diplomacy. This is our policy. We want to make peace. You want to make peace, sit with us. You don't want to make peace. Everything else is a pretext. Everything else. Whatever you hear about why we don't want to sit with the Syrians is a pretext, because they know that once peace is achieved, then all those issues will go into their right place and will fit into the, into the larger framework. Please do remember that Nelson Mandela used to be described as a terrorist when he was imprisoned by the South African apartheid regime. For years and years, he was being described as a terrorist. So using negative terms, accusations, lead to nowhere. It's about the desire and how serious you are about whether you want to address the issues or not.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Our time is up. The Wilson Center is a non-partisan institution, so when you start your Syria and